Maniac! Maniac! Oh yeah. And I'm snipping like I've never snipped before. Howdy gang, Bad Player 03 here, and welcome to another Bad Players WoW vlog snippet. I wanted to do another vlog right away because to further touch on the new unannounced mysterious feature coming to World of Warcraft. And the reason I wanted to do another one is right after I posted my last vlog, Ghostcrawler there's a posting about a comment Ghostcrawler had made that totally, changed my perspective, and really, in my mind, I think narrowed down what the feature is going to be based on. The post basically, when Ghostcrawler was queried about his feelings regarding the Valor vendors, new Valor vendors, the new Valor gear going away in the patch 5.4, his comment was, but we do want a way for non-raiders to be able to get gear, but I don't want to announce this feature yet. Now that really kind of struck home to me because yeah, quite clearly for raiders, Valor's no Valor gear is not that big of a deal because raiders are going to run the LFR. They're hopefully going to run some higher level raids. They're going to get drops. They're going to use their Valor to upgrade their gear. They're not really in need of, say, a supplemental series of gear, although of course some LFR raiders might be a little bit disappointed with that because, you know, drops in the LFR are notoriously bad for some people, or a bad drop rate for some unlucky people, and that might make them feel like they're kind of dragging behind. So perhaps maybe some of the LFR raiders might be tempted to use any features designed for people that are non-raiders. Now really, the fact he said non-raiders really struck home because, yeah, for them, because there is no such thing as LFR drops if they don't raid, or unless you consider LFR raiders non-raiders, which I really don't feel that's a good definition of a non-raider. They really don't have any way of getting a decent set of gear. And of course, you know, obviously raiders might say, well, if you don't raid, what do you need a decent set of gear for? But it's a pride thing, it's a vanity thing, it's a character development thing. And of course, non-raiders are used to having this Valor option, to getting a decent set of gear that they can get Valor through running dungeons, running scenarios, and that sort of thing. So they kind of got spoiled, and to give them, or take this away from them, seems almost cruel. So what kind of feature could utilize all the hints that we've been given so far about what the feature that they're really hinting towards is based on, yet would be designed for, or really aimed at the non-raiders? Well, in my mind, it has to focus on, well, it could focus on previous raids. I mean, there's still a notion that running previous raids is cool if you scale them down and get to see old content. But really, if you're a non-raider, are you really going to see scaled down raids that force you to run older raids in a simulated, approximated version of what the raid originally was back then as non-raiding content? I don't think so. I really don't see a lot of people who would not raid LFR or regular raiding seeing that as something that they're going to do instead, because it's still raiding and it still has a difficulty component to it that approximates raiding, which is something that non-raiders generally would be considered to want to avoid. So I think it's got to be aimed at dungeons, one way or another now. That basically the idea of, if you could take any dungeon in the game and scale a level 90 character to an approximate level of what they would have been like when the dungeon was actually current, and let him run through it, it would actually, even though it wouldn't feel exactly the same or be exactly the same, it would kind of give them a feel or an approximation or simulation of what that run might have been like. And this would be a feature that would be interesting for players who don't raid and therefore have a limited amount of content. Well, now there's, I don't know, what is 30, 40, 50, how many old dungeons there are they could run at their leisure? I think this would give non-raiders a lot of stuff to do. But now, of course, we're talking about gear. So how do you make something like that relevant when the gear is, those raids were out of date? Well, obviously, one of the answers could simply be, you run through this, you get a gear drop, and when you leave the raid, or sorry, the dungeon, the instance awards you with a piece of loot that's an appropriate level with, you know, the same item. So basically, let's say you go back and you get I'm not going to use a piece of loot, but let's say you get a really nice piece of loot from a previous raid. Now when you leave, or I keep saying raid, previous dungeon, pardon me, previous dungeon, when you leave the dungeon, let's say that piece of gear is now a level 500 and some odd piece of non-epic, but, you know, appropriate level for 5.4 non-raid loot. Now that would be kind of a cool idea, except think of all the pieces of gear that were in all these classical old dungeons. That's an awful lot of pieces of gear all of a sudden released into the max level, type of I don't know what you want to call it, max level, whatever, released as a max level item. That's a lot of max level items all of a sudden you have. And really, then what would be the point of transmog? It would almost like diminish the benefits and the effects of transmog. So it doesn't seem like something they would do, although they could. Maybe more appropriately would be a token system where, let's say when you run through one of these old dungeons, you're given a token or two of maybe and then you can use these tokens as you run more of these classic dungeons to buy a set of gear that's really aimed at a non-raider, say like loot that's slightly below the LFR level, so that you feel that the non-raiders feel that they have some way of progressing their character without raiding, yet they have some reason to run to look at classic dungeons as a means of getting gear. So that's an intriguing idea. I mean, really, they could make a token of any real type. They could make a set of gear that utilizes these tokens, and players who, let's say, LFR are not having much luck could still utilize such a system to get those extra pieces of gear. Yet people who did real raiding or heroic raiding would probably not even really look at it. They might help their buddies who are non-raiders to get these pieces of gear. Maybe they'll run with them or maybe they'll go back just to enjoy the old dungeons. But really, the content is quite clearly aimed at players that do not raid, and that is their means of getting a set of gear to progress their character in 5.4. So that's another way they could do it. They could have, say, a daily quest to run this particular dungeon at a scale level. You get the daily quest or weekly quest, and you queue up. You get a random group, you run through it, and you get a reward based upon that quest. That could be maybe a satchel, a random loot chance, or once again, maybe it could be some kind of token that you collect and buy a set of gear. So really, all these means are ways of getting people to run old content and making it more relevant again. Like, Blizzard's not dumb. I mean, some of the knock against the idea of scaled content is, why would players do this? There's no reward for doing it. Well, Blizzard's not dumb. They're going to make a reward for doing this that's appropriate to the audience they're targeting. And that could, if it is a non-rating audience they're targeting, that would be the best way to do that, would be to have some form of token or gear available as a reward for that maybe is not appropriate for, say, a raider, but is appropriate for a player who is not interested in raiding. And so that's a way to bring a massive amount of content, particularly for the non-raiders who are desperate for lots of content, because, I mean, face it, Blizzard puts a lot of effort into the raids and a lot of work of their new content into the raid part of that. And for non-raiders, they don't really get to appreciate this, even if unless they become, they start to run the LFR, which for some people they just do not see even LFR as something they want to do. It's raiding. They are not raiders. So that would give a type of content that would basically give non-raiders lots to do, and would also give anyone else in the game, a way and a reason to run old content and kind of approximate or experience what that might have been like at that level. Because one, it's hard to go back unless you level a new tune and actually experience it, and two, not everybody who who played WoW saw all this content. Like let's say a player starting now, with the speed that you can level up and get through the beginning levels, not every player have ran every dungeon, or maybe some people even leveled up without running any dungeons. And so all these dungeons are no longer accessible to them as a normal dungeon experience, and yet they never got to experience them when they were that level either. So this gives them a chance to at least approximate or see what it's like, which is also an intriguing idea. And plus it takes Blizzard's vast array of content that were put into these dungeons over the last 8 years and bring them right back to the forefront and make them meaningful. Like maybe give Valor too, to make players who aren't just non-raiders or not non-raiders, a reason to run it too, as an alternative to the other methods of getting Valor and of developing their character at max level. If you give them an alternative, we've already seen one of the themes of this expansion has been lots of alternative ways of gearing your character so you can choose, whether it's pet battles, whether it's scenarios, whether it's dungeons, whether it's the mastery content in the new heroic scenarios, or the challenge modes. That's the term I was trying to remember. It's basically a massive array, or a bunch of different options of ways to progress your character. So simply running, or definitely running a classic dungeon, could also be another means of doing this that would maybe entice some people to do an old dungeon they hadn't done in a long time. Like myself, as I said, I'd love to be able to run the frozen halls again from ICC and have some relevance and experience that that's a little bit of that feeling again. Or maybe to run Zul'Aman and Zul'Gurub. I like the new Zandalari dungeons, the way they made them, and I ran them a lot, and that was a very fond experience back then. And then all of a sudden they had no meaning anymore. Because even when I was leveling my last few characters, by the time you get to that level, there just isn't any reason to run Zul'Aman and Zul'Gurub. You go straight on to the next level of content, basically the three Dragon Soul instances. So you basically end up skipping those all the time now, and there really is never a reason to run Zul'Aman and Zul'Gurub again, except trying to get the mounts and stuff associated with them. So this would allow or give players at max level a reason to do something like this again. So I think it's a win-win all around. But I mean, they don't even have to do it even. Let's say they chose for some reason not to use pure scaling, in 5-man dungeons. I suppose they could also use a 3-man scenario. Maybe they could make a whole bunch of dungeons. Maybe not all of them, because some of them, three men might have been a problem with some of the bosses. Although I think most could probably be tackled with it. They could use a 3-man scenario version of some of these dungeons to go back and experience them again. And they could be any 3 players, because when you outgear the content a little bit, maybe you don't need a tank and a healer and DPS. Maybe a mixture can do. Maybe a DPS with a good healer can survive, or maybe 3 DPSs can down the bosses in the ad so quickly they don't need to be healed or have a tank. So maybe they could make a scenario instance, and that scenario could give some kind of reward. There's another way they could bring dungeons back to the current level without scaling. And finally, they could even just basically give players incentive to run old content at full level. Maybe not to even scale them at all, or not require them to be scaled. They could allow players who run any old dungeon by themselves or with other players, if they so choose, up to the maximum number that they could do. Just simply you hack your way through this dungeon, and you get a token of some sort that you can use to buy some lower level, 5.4 gear. And that could be another means to give players reason to run old content again, even if it isn't scaled down anyway, even if it is just hack and slash. Whereas now, to go back to finish some of those Burning Crusade dungeons again that I didn't finish some of my characters, I just don't have time. It doesn't seem like something I want to do because I spend too much time doing things that are relevant to my character at max level. Well, if you could make them relevant again by giving some form of progression path from this, then maybe it would be easier and more for me to make the decision. Today I'm going to run this old instance and hack my way through it. Or maybe, if I could team up with other players, but I'm a pretty good soloist, so I probably wouldn't. But maybe there's some players who aren't as good as soloists who would team up in 2s or 3s, whatever, and go through and hack their way through. Or maybe they just hack their way as a group of 5 just for the fun of it, so they can, pwn the entire instance. But they could also bring some form of a token system to soloing, I suppose. But in all those ideas, I think the most sensible one, especially with the new technology and the fact that they're talking about this feature being cool and adding a real new cool aspect to WoW, really would be scaled dungeons. A scaling method to queue up and run any of the old dungeons in the history of WoW as if you were at that level again, or at least to approximate that level again, as I said, because you can't go back. You can only try to create an experience that's similar to that, so that you can let players relive the nostalgia again, I guess, if you will, or something like that. Some of the nostalgia, anyways. I think that seems to make the most sense because that will give it a legacy aspect and something that will stand the test of time. Blizzard can say, yes, we brought back all our old content at once and allowed players to choose any of it to do and made it relevant for them and enjoyable to do that. So, no other game has really said that yet, that they can, they have a really long history of content like WoW does in terms of their dungeons, and all of a sudden they brought the whole shebang back and said, here you go, have at it, so you can experience it all again. That would be quite a cool thing to stand the test of time. And if WoW ever does start to decline and eventually die, scaling in all the content is going to be a way that WoW will live out its last days as a very memorable experience, because the players could then go back and relive any old content as it was at that time, to feel it one more time before the game dies. And I think just in general, giving that nostalgic ability to live the nostalgic fantasy, I guess, for players is a great way for any game to go out. So, anyways, just in general, I really think that's the direction they're going to head with this. They're heading with this new feature, is aiming it at non-raiders specifically, but giving something hopefully for everybody in the game who is interested in experiencing some old dungeons again, but making it relevant to the max level goal of gear progression, so that players will actually have a reason to run the content and will not feel like in running the content they're nerfing their ability to gain max level development. So I guess we're going to see hopefully shortly, but I really think, and I guess in some ways I hope, because I really would like to be able to just to feel I can run an old dungeon if I want to when I feel like it, and have some reason to do that. Have that aspect of the game. I think that would be a really cool addition to the game to just enhance the options we have on a day-to-day basis to gear our character. And of course, it doesn't have to even be only level 90. That could be something that in future expansions and future levels we could go back and have something relevant to that period of time, for running this old content. So it's something that could stand the test of time and just give players another alternative to the options they already have for progressing their character. So anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. Once again, I'm Bad Player 03, Daniel Gagne, Realthus Killdog. You can follow me on Twitter at BadPlayer03, capital B, capital P, under the account Daniel Gagne. You can see all these videos on my YouTube account. And of course, I particularly still hope you will check out my Bad Players Lore Raid model, because I'm still proud of it and still feel this is the best solution to revive raiding in WoW. And of course, also my other vlogs and content and that sort of thing that is there for your enjoyment. And I hope you'll subscribe, because I'm putting out lots of new content whenever I get a chance, and I want you to be the first person to experience it. So yeah, give me a subscription and leave me some comments. Let me know what you think. I know I got a few comments about my last vlog. Glad to see it. I'm looking forward to giving some replies on that. And of course, you can also email me at Gmail at badplayer03@gmail.com. Always look forward to feedback, and I don't know what you think of my ideas, good or bad, that sort of thing. I'm always open to feedback from the community. So anyways, I'm going to bid you all good night. Bye now.